it's Petra here. How are you going? Look, I was actually a bit curious about how some of my garments fit because one that I knit recently, in fact, my last finished object, is definitely a bit on the small side. And I've got one that's on the needles that I've been umming and ahhing about whether I should frog it. And I had a feeling it was too small. And what I decided to do was use a template of my body that I had created about a month or two ago. I can't remember exactly. And essentially what I did was I recorded all my body measurements and put them onto a foam template so that I could block out my knitwear on the template. And I found this really informative, but I hadn't yet done it with all of my knitwear. Now, in fact, some of the recent knitwear I hadn't put it against the template at all. I'd really only used it on one project so far. And so I was curious to see how some of my other things were going to fit, especially where I know that there's garments that I don't wear all the time because of a fitting issue. And I wanted to see how much it was out by so that if I see that again on this fitting template, I'll know that it's not going to fit. So I've got the template here. Essentially, I created this out of an offcut of foam. It didn't cost me that much to get the foam. I just went to a foam offcut shop and he cut it to size for me. And so essentially it starts out at the neck. This is how wide my neck is. I've got the width of my shoulders and the slope of my shoulders, so I can see how wide my shoulders are at the widest part. Down here I've got the widest part under my underarms. I've worked out the height, so I did make a mistake here. It's actually this one here. I accidentally made it a bit too tall the first time. So, or I can show you this side where I correct it. So this is the widest point at my underarms. Sorry, I've got a few hairs stuck to it. And this diagonal kind of represents the curved line that we tend to make our garments follow around our underarm. We don't tend to just cast off all the stitches and then knit straight. We do tend to cast off a few and then we'll curve the rest in. And then it goes to the widest point at my bust here and the narrowest point at my waist. I've drawn another line joining my bust measurement to my hip for if I want to create a garment that's very square. And then down at the bottom here is the hip measurement. So my hips and my bust are pretty much the same, but yours may well be different. And this line across here is my natural waist, or the thinnest point of my waist. This point here is my waist measurement. So I've been just taking all my knitwear out of the drawer and putting it up against this template, see what fits and what doesn't. It's given me some fantastic ideas for next time I am shaping my knitwear, and I can see immediately why some of the garments that I have made most recently were, well, one in particular was a little bit too small. I can see quite clearly why that is the case, because against the template it is quite a bit smaller. This one turned out a little bit too small, and I followed the pattern exactly as written in the vintage pattern, which I really shouldn't have done. I know now, well, I've known for a while that I need to adapt vintage patterns to be a lot taller, because I'm taller than most vintage patterns were written for. I think I did make it a little bit longer this way. But the problem that I have here is that it is just too tight around the shoulders. So you can see that I have negative ease against my template. It's not too bad though, and where the arm size starts, I'm pretty much spot on. So I don't have any issue with the fit there. And when you consider the negative ease, essentially my body's going to stretch it this way. I don't have too much trouble there if I'm wanting it to be fitting with negative ease. But what you can see though is as I start to stretch it, the body will come up, which is quite normal for negative ease. So really I should have made this a few inches longer as well if I wanted the top of the ribbing to sit at my waistline, which is what I prefer, because instead I've now got the bottom of the ribbing sitting at my waistline. Now when we have a look at the shoulders, if I have my underarms on my garment sitting exactly where I've got positioned on my template, you can see that for it to fit me in the shoulders correctly, my garment is stretching and it wants to pop back, so it's having to stretch like this when I wear it, which makes it a little bit uncomfortable. So if I was to make this again, I would definitely add more rows of the garter stitch. And in fact, at the time that I was making it, I was considering, should I be adding more rows here? But I thought, no, the pattern knows best. I'll just follow what the pattern says. I don't think it was right. I could fix this. So it wouldn't be too hard. I'd have to remove the bows. I'd have to remove this bit of crochet that I put here and remove the neckline. And then I can add more stripes to the neckline and then sew the bows back on. That might actually be a reasonable solution. The only thing is the arms are a little bit tight around there as well. You can see that I've had to, well, look, it is reasonable. It will stretch, so I can see there that it stretches. Even though it wants to pop back down, it is actually kind of folded here. So that the shoulder actually, the arm side actually fits okay. It's just a little bit tight there. So I could also remove these bands and make them a little bit wider too, although that's a ribbing. But having ribbing really tight right at that point is not hugely flattering, so it might actually be better to widen that up a bit. But certainly I can see that this is too short at the top, and having this template has really helped with that. Alrighty. Here's one I'm working on at the moment, and with this one I had been paying close attention to fit, although now that I'm looking at it, it looks tight again. But I have tried this one on and it is fitting quite well. Wool does tend to bounce back when you when it's not on the garment, especially this one. I've got cables, so if I was to put my arms in there and stretch it to that widest point at the underarms, that does so without any trouble. I've got it fitting so that the top of the band fits me at the waist. This is my waist point here. I've drawn these lines for if I want to have a square garment that kind of fits at the hip. But if I want to have a fitted waist, it fits me at the waist. And then it does actually fit, but I've just got to pull it outwards a bit. So when I try this on, it does sit in a way that you can see a bit of the band there. So it's not fitting, like I had intended this one to be fitting snug, and it fits really nicely. And then when you get to the full bust, there is a little bit of adjustment there where it's going over my bust. You can probably see it stretches out a little bit, but around the waist it fits quite nicely. And then in terms of these shoulders, I had actually set it up so that it fit in the shoulders. But again, I think it comes down to when you've washed the garment, it pops back a bit. I've got all this mess. Because if I look at it here, and so maybe actually the other one wasn't so bad, but if I look at it here, it does fit up to the shoulders, and if I pull on it a little bit, it doesn't have any trouble reaching the top of that shoulder point there. but it does require a bit of pulling. I think it's because of the cables. But when I try this one on, it is actually fitting quite perfectly. So I think that any pulling that I'm having to do here is just the fact that it has a bit of negative ease. But it still shows me that even though with this one I planned it quite well according to fit. In fact, I was using this particular one as a model for designing something to fit. When you measure your swatch, it really depends on how you've got the swatch aligned as to how the garment's going to fit, because when I measured my swatch, I actually opened it up a bit like this so that I knew how it was going to fit with the lace showing. But when you have a cabled garment, it wants to pull in again. So when it's resting, it ends up smaller than it's going to look when it's worn. But in my case, I want to be able to see these lace bits, and so I've already tried it on. So one of the things that I like to do is when I've completed my pieces, I'll just roughly seam them up with some waste yarn, just like really quick seaming. No, it's not even seaming, it's just basting. And then I'll try it on, and then I know for sure that it fits me before I start working on other things. Because if I need to unravel some of the neck or shoulders, then I'm going to want to do that before I start trying to fit sleeves in or anything like that. Alright, that's what I'm working on at the moment. Here's one I knit a bit earlier in the year. Now this one fits me really well. It's really comfortable. I'm really happy with it. And you can see now that it's on my template that it's basically fits my template perfectly. It's got a tiny, tiny bit of negative ease at the waist and just above the waist, which is actually very flattering because it means that it doesn't bulk up around this part of the body. So essentially it's going to fit me slightly stretched like this. The top of the waistband fits me at the narrowest part of my waist, which I find flattering on my body. The arm size starts just at the right spot, and then the shoulders hit just at the right spot, and I don't have to stretch them for my shoulder angles. The top of the neck fits right at the top of the neck on my template, and yeah, I can see why this one is just so comfortable. It is just such a perfect fit. I did a great job of fit on this one. Okay, this one is an interesting one. This one fits me really well top half. So here to here it fits great. And I'd say even from about here, it fits really nicely. Obviously there's a bit of negative ease here, but it's ribbed and it doesn't concern me because when I wear it, it stretches out like that and it just looks quite flattering. The part that you can see that it, when I do that, it pulls down a little bit in the shoulder, but if I hold it down, it fits quite well in the shoulders as well. The problem that I have with this one is when I first started the knitting for it, the pattern had too many stitches at the bottom. And so it flares out at the bottom, and you can see actually that if I hold it out like this, it flares out wider than my pattern, and I don't like that. I find this really annoying at the bottom, and I tend to tuck it in as a result. I don't really like leaving it open, and I can, this particular pattern actually, it starts out with one size needle at the bottom, gets you to go to a smaller size needle, and then goes back out to the larger size needle again. I did see that I didn't like it at the bottom, and so I recalculated the number of stitches that I wanted, and I don't know if you can tell, but down the bottom there's a certain number of stitches in between the ribs, and I came to the conclusion that I didn't like that, so I narrowed it and made it fewer stitches in here. So there's less stitches in here than there is down here. And I would consider actually this to be a mistake in the pattern, because my gauge was accurate to the pattern's gauge, and so there were just too many stitches for the size that they said. So they published what size it was going to be, and there were too many stitches. And I wouldn't be surprised actually that this pattern had a mistake, because it had other mistakes. The most notable mistake being that the garment was not symmetrical. It has, in my size, it has an even number of these ribs, and this line here ends up being the center, and I ended up having to change it to put 2 here, 2 there, 2 here, 2 here, etc. because in the original pattern it had one here, 1 there, 1 there, and it wasn't symmetrical, and it was just going to drive me batty. And I spent long enough knitting it that I wanted to be able to wear it. So I actually really like this garment. I just have to tuck it into pants. Okay, this pattern I've been calling my cardigan of doom, and I'm going to reknit this because this one's kind of horrible. So I've got quite a few problems here. First of all, the original pattern that I took this from was a 1980s pattern, and it had shoulder pads in the pattern. And in fact, the pattern looks like the original photo looks like she's about to go play a game of sports. So I really should have known that I was going to have fit problems if I translated the original pattern as is. It was written for DK, but I translated it all into 4-ply. The biggest problem I have with the fit on this is the shoulders, and you can see that I've got the neck pretty fine. I mean, the button band kind of starts at the side of the neck, that's all fine, but when you look at the shoulders, this is where my shoulders would end, and this is where the shoulders on my knit end. It's about 2 inches too wide in the shoulders, and I really don't like this because the shoulder cap isn't sitting actually on the shoulders. Now I can't reknit this because I've steeked it, so I have sewn this directly onto steek stitches, and so that's the end of it. I've also steeked the arms here, so there's no way that I can pull this out again and reknit it, but it's definitely a learning exercise in fit. So yeah, I don't like it at all because of the shoulders. I tried putting shoulder pads in mine, and I recently took them out because the fabric that I've got is fairly fine, and they just looked too bulky under the fine fabric. So I'm really just going to be using this as a learning exercise. The other thing that you can see here, and don't mind the fact that I've lost a button, if I set this to my actual body width, you can see that I have not knit the button band long enough, and as a result the front of the body is higher than the back of the body by quite a bit, and it's quite pronounced when I put it on this flat foam. So I'm going to be using this foam so much moving forward, but I can see now exactly why I find this uncomfortable to wear, because and essentially I can only wear it with a dress, because if I wear it over trousers it fits quite nicely at the back. Well, I say quite nicely, it's still a bit on the short side, it's definitely cropped because this is my waistline here, but at the front it's way too high, it's like super cropped. I'm in my 40s, I don't want to be showing my stomach to the whole world. I don't know what it is. I know that I need to knit my garments longer, but for some reason I have a habit of knitting them a little bit too short. So I know moving forward that I need to do a bit more, just a bit more knitting would be a good idea. So yeah, this particular one I would consider a disaster. The shoulders are just really not flattering, and I know now that I have to knit my button band longer so that the whole thing gets pulled down a bit more. If I do pull this down like so, it ends up a bit short at the shoulders. So literally I could have just knit a little bit more on the button band and it probably would have been okay. All right, this one gets a lot of wear. I'm really happy with it. You can see that the arm side fits exactly where it should. The top of the shoulder fits exactly where it should. The top of the neck easily fits where it should. So when that's all on, it's quite comfortable. There is one little issue here which is quite subtle, but I can see it. When I hold it in the right positions, the arm actually dips in a little bit. It would have been more comfortable for me if I had added a bit more stitches in here or decreased less rapidly, so that I had not so much of a concave shape when it's stretched to this point. It is a little bit tight at the top of my arms. So actually that would have been also alleviated if I'd used a larger needle size at the top here. In terms of the body, this is ribbing, so it easily stretches to the width that I need. So the negative ease here is no problem at all. This part here with the mesh, again, easily stretches to the right point. And it sits very comfortably on my hips. So all around, that one's a fitting success. Okay, this one I'm in the middle of making at the moment. And from the look of this, I believe it's going to fit, but it will be potentially a little bit shorter than I had intended. So I've already washed and blocked these pieces, so they should actually be relatively accurate to this. And I've positioned the bottom on the arm side area here. The shoulder is here, and so definitely this fits me in the shoulder. Now I was worried that this was a bit too wide actually. When I was measuring as I went, it just seemed a bit too wide, so I actually narrowed the number of stitches here, which was possibly a mistake because I need to still sew this in. So the shawl neck is going to be very close to the edge of my shoulder in terms of where it starts. Sorry if the lighting conditions have changed, it's a few hours later. Now this one is one that I'm currently working on, and initially when I started knitting it, I was concerned that the needle size that I was using might have been slightly too big because it's a little bit wider at the underarms than I was expecting. So it's about 1 inch too wide at the underarms. So on the back I used a 4mm needle, so on the front I changed to a 3.75mm needle. What I can see is it's going to stretch to the sides quite easily, so it's definitely fitting there. I have tried this on and it fits. But what I can see though, because I did the front in a 3.75mm needle instead of 4, the button band might get a little bit stretched because the button band's supposed to be fairly narrow for this garment, but what I can see is that if I have a very narrow button band, it might actually gape a bit on the button band, so I might actually want to knit my button band a bit wider, which means that I probably should have just left it with the 4mm needle that I'd started off with. The other thing as well is I can see that my shoulders definitely fit, but the shoulders are quite narrow on this particular garment because it's going to have a large shawl collar. Because I found that the back was a little bit too big, I also made it narrower here as well as using the slightly smaller needle. And so what it means is I haven't got very much room at the top here to pick up stitches, and I might need to knit the shawl collar a little bit wider as well, potentially, to make sure that it's covering my shoulders properly. But other than that, I think this one's going to fit quite fine. It certainly is matching the dimensions okay. And also with this one, I'm going to be sewing that shawl collar at the back, so it will stick up a little bit at the back. It's not going to be too deep at the back like it looks here. Okay, this one I knit late last year, and this one does fit very well in width. So you can see it pretty much exactly hits the underarms. There's actually a tiny bit of ease there, so there's about 1 centimetre on each side of ease at the underarms. This particular one doesn't taper too much, so it doesn't have a lot of negative ease actually. It pretty much just skims my body perfectly with a slightly too much width at the waist, but that's fine. It is a bit short for me, so it would have been better if I had knit a few more stripes so that it was sitting a little bit more on my hip rather than sitting at my natural waist. But at the shoulders, it looks like it's too short at the shoulders, but this particular garment does stretch onto the shoulders quite well. When I do that, it tends to make it pull up a little bit though. So that's one area where sometimes you think that it's long enough, but because you need a bit more room for the shoulders, what can happen here is that the rest of the garment can end up lifting if you haven't given enough for the top half of the body. And so this one does tend to sit at my waist. But overall, the fit of this one is quite good. Okay, this is an older garment that I knit a while back. I actually really like this slip stitch pattern that I used, and I think I'll try again another slip stitch one. I had some leftover 4-ply yarn, but I used it with a DK, and I really like the effect of that actually. I think that looks really nice. This particular one fits really well again at the underarms, and this one fits really well in height. It goes up to the shoulder lines quite well. It is actually a little bit too wide on the shoulders. I ended up putting shoulder pads in this one, and it is definitely a bit too wide. I used to find that I used to knit all of my jumpers too wide at the shoulders until I worked out that I must have fairly petite shoulders and that I really need to make my shoulders less wide. So I've been focusing on the shoulders quite a bit lately with my garments. But one issue that I have with this particular one, it fits really nicely around the body. You can see that if I pull this out to my body width, it's nice and flat. It's not gaping too much or anything like that. But at the very bottom, it flares quite a bit because I've got too much fabric at the bottom. Which is similar to some other garments that I've got. So this is a mistake that I've obviously made a few times in the past. This one doesn't have ribbing at the bottom, and I have been trying to correct this mistake lately. So I've been trying to avoid having too much fabric at the bottom with my more recent makes. But yeah, this one I made a few years ago. This one was the very first vintage garment I ever made, and in fact this is the original of the one that I'm working on at the moment, which is cables in like a rusty coloured yarn. This one I just knit according to the pattern, and immediately I can see there's a few fit issues here. I suddenly got hooked on vintage knitting after this, but I hardly ever wear this garment now because it's too short. I'm definitely a lot taller than vintage garments are if you knit them to pattern. So this is my waist here. Certainly when I'm wearing it, it does stretch a little bit more. It doesn't show that much of my stomach, but it does sit very short on me. If I stretch it out to the armpits there, then yeah, essentially it's just much too cropped for my liking. I would have preferred another 3 pattern repeats and then maybe twice as much ribbing as well, so that it would have come down here. In terms of the shoulders though, this fits me really nicely in the shoulders. I think I must have quite petite shoulders like I mentioned before, because that's the shoulder seam there and there, and that fits nicely there. And then this shawl neck's really flattering. It just sits around wherever your natural kind of neck point is, and so it can be adjusted up or down depending on how you wear that collar, and it's a very flattering collar. I'm looking forward to having another one of these in my wardrobe. It's been such a long time since I knit this one. It was I had a hiatus from knitting for quite a while, maybe 8 years or so, and so this one I knit probably 10 or 11 years ago. I really love the buttons and how the buttons match with the garment. I find them really pretty. Okay, this is another really old one, and this one fits really nicely. You can see that essentially it skims my body really well. I think I knit this entire thing on a 2.75mm needle, which is about the same needle size I use for socks. And it's mostly all stockinette, so it took ages. I was really happy when I had this one finished. But it does have a very good fit. It fits well everywhere. It fits well. You can see the shoulders go all the way up to the top. There is a little bit of excess fabric here because of the style. It basically grows out of the main garment rather than having set in shoulder shaping. One thing that I am considering re-hemming this one, because just at the bottom, hopefully you can see that, yeah you can, the cast off is ever so slightly tight for my hips. Basically I've got that at the most that it will stretch, and it exactly sits at my hips, and I can feel this cast off edge digging into me a little bit when I wear it. So I am thinking of, I've got a tiny bit of this yarn left, and I'm thinking of taking the hem off and then recasting off with a stretchier bind off. But other than that, this one fits perfectly. Okay, this one I'm working on right now, and part of the reason why I got this mat out in the first place is I wanted to check on some of the things I'm currently working on to make sure that I don't have to frog them back. One in particular I think I'm going to have to frog back. But this one here, I can see that it's fitting perfectly at the underarms. It's a really nice fit at the underarms. And in terms of, so this is some steek stitches. In terms of the top half, I might actually need to redesign it so that it has a little bit more of this colour work at the top, because I'm a bit worried that the design is going to have it stop a bit too short. So that may well be on the cards. I was actually intending for the very top of the rib to end up at the waistline, but already I can see that it's ended up a couple of centimetres higher than that, and because it's got negative ease, if I stretch this out, it is actually going to be the thinnest part of my waist is going to be midway through this ribbing, so it will still be fairly short on me. Not as short as some of the other garments though, but when you stretch a garment when you wear it, it will lift up because now more of the yarn is going into the width and not into the height. So really I should have either started the garment a little bit wider so that it wouldn't have as much negative ease, so that it wouldn't stretch as much, or I should have added a few more rows before I started on the colour work. So that's a little bit disappointing, but I have tried it on and I think it will still be okay. It's just again going to be on the shorter side. But I do tend to wear my jumpers cropped, so that's not necessarily an issue. That is the way that I like to wear them most of the time. But I'm definitely going to be careful to make sure not to have too little pattern at the top and then have it be too short like the other garment. And in actual fact as well, if I want to have it sit a little bit lower, another thing that I could do is I could make the armhole depth a bit longer so that the underarms, instead of sitting right at the underarms, I can have them sit a little bit lower than the underarms. and then it's going to fit in the right place at the waist. It just means that the top part of the garment will be longer. And what I would need to do as well is consider the fact that I have dropped the armpits slightly when I'm constructing the sleeves. I might just make it drop by about 1 centimetre so that it's not too much, but it just gives me a little bit more at the bottom. This one fits really nicely with high-waisted pants or a high-waisted skirt. It's definitely cropped, but it's quite flattering when it's worn because it's such a fine top that it stretches very well and it's got a nice drape. This one's pure cashmere and I dyed it myself. But what I can see is that this particular one, the shoulders fit really well and the underarm fits really well. So everything top half is perfect. In terms of the bottom half, certainly I could have made it a bit longer. This one is quite on the short side, so I do have to wear it with high-waisted pants and skirts like I said, but it does fit very nicely. I'm really quite happy with this one. Alright, this one also fits really well with high-waisted pants. I don't tend to wear it with a skirt because it's a bit busy, because essentially these are all done with marling. So I just held 2 lace weight yarns together. This one's also a bit of an older one. I had some troubles with the yarn biasing, so I don't know if you can tell, but the stitches are on a bit of a diagonal. But it fits really well. I can see it fits perfectly at the underarms. It's a nice cropped length that tends to sit at my waist, and then the shoulders are maybe slightly too wide. Yeah, the shoulders are a little bit too wide actually, but it doesn't look too bad when worn, and they certainly are tall enough. They do stretch up to the top of my shoulders without any trouble, and because it has a slightly wider neck as well, it doesn't need to stretch too much because it can go sideways a bit. So this one does fit very well against my template. Okay, this one I knit last year. It does also fit quite well. It is a cropped style. This one I wear with a high-waisted black skirt. I don't really wear it with too many other things because it's a bit busy for anything that's got a pattern on the bottom. It fits me really nicely at the underarms. It fits me perfectly at the shoulders. That's my shoulder seam there and there. So it works really nicely on the shoulders. It fits well around the neck. It does tend to flop open a bit at the front. This one is a open style. I guess it was intended to be worn a bit more like this, but because then it has a bit of negative ease, and it hasn't got the buttons, so it will conform more to my body shape and tend to sit open. So if I want to have it closed, then usually I end up having to put a brooch in this one. Generally, I think I prefer to have styles that, because I do prefer negative ease, I prefer pullover styles rather than open or cardigan styles, because I do find that having the yarn stretch itself due to the negative ease of the vintage garments, I think is more flattering compared to having it fly open at the front. Okay, this is another really old one. I think this is the second vintage garment that I ever knit, and this is just a plain broken rib pattern all over. So I didn't need extra ribbing because the broken rib already lets it sit straight. This one does fit very well. So if I pull it to my body measurements, it just sits nicely just below the thinnest part of my waist, which is where I like things to sit anyway. The shoulders and neck fit well. It's slightly wide at the shoulders, maybe a couple of centimetres on each side, which is probably okay because this is quite a bulky yarn and so I'm definitely going to be wearing it over a t-shirt and things like that. I'm not really going to be wearing this one. Also, the yarn's it's got a lot of guard hairs. It's got like these really long hairs sticking out everywhere, so it is quite itchy, and so I don't tend to wear this just on its own. And so I do like the fit of this. It's fine to have things a little bit larger than the shoulders if you're expecting it to be a jacket style, but overall I prefer to have my shoulders nipped in, so these days I've been trying to knit them a little bit narrower at the shoulders. Okay, this one I'm working on at the moment, and I'm going to frog because it doesn't fit me well. I mentioned this one in my video last time. I made a mistake here where I didn't knit enough rows of the orange, and I was deliberating about whether I keep it or leave it because this is my first time doing an all over colourwork pattern right from the bottom, and I didn't want to rip back because I'm not very good at picking up the stitches and I haven't got a lifeline in here. But I was thinking about this morning and I realised I was pretty sure it was too small. I have actually got a steek on the side where I was planning to put in a zip, but my suspicion was correct that it was way too small. I haven't been increasing it rapidly enough. I had tried to make this quite narrow at the waist, but it's just way too narrow. There's quite a bit of negative ease on both sides, which isn't a good idea for a garment that is all over colourwork because it's going to be too hard to get on. I had measured my gauge against my other colourwork jumper that I have using the same yarn, but it might be that in this one, I haven't washed this. So washing it might make it wider, but it may well be that my tension has changed when it's 100% colourwork as opposed to just colourwork in some bands. So this one's definitely going to get frogged and started again. Before I frog it though, what I'm going to do is I'll wash it and block it, and then I'll take a new gauge measurement from my washed and blocked garment, and then I'll frog it with those gauge counts all properly measured, and then essentially I'm going to use this as one big swatch. I might even start again without frogging this one first in case I need to refer to any more measurements, but most likely once I've recorded the measurements for it I'll be fine. But yeah, this one's going to have to go, and I haven't got too far with it. I had a feeling there was something wrong with it, which is why I didn't progress further anyway. This is the last one I'm putting on my template. I was wearing this as I was looking at all the others, so now I'm a bit cold, but I can see now why I wear this all the time. This one fits me really well, and I'm looking at my template. I've just got it bang on in every place. This one does actually feel a little bit loose on me around my body, because I am used to wearing things with a bit of negative ease, which I like, but this just feels comfortable though, and I can see now that pretty much every measurement it's perfectly against. My waistline comes here, so it does actually go more straight down rather than cinch in too much, even though it does have a bit of waist shaping, it's subtle. It fits me with the shoulders are slightly wider than my actual shoulders are, but really only by a centimetre or so on each side, and I don't notice it too much. I was hoping that next time I make an all over colourwork like this, I'll make the shoulders slightly narrower, but the height from the underarm to the shoulders is absolutely perfect. No wonder it's so comfortable. I did have to cut the neck a bit wider than the original pattern because the original pattern had the neck very narrow, but I cut this one to my own liking and it fits very comfortably now, and I can see the arms are quite comfortable at the top here. They've got plenty of room but not too much, so it's not a wonder that this one's a staple and I wear it all the time. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I found it really, really helpful. Please, if you haven't done so before, try and make your own template. It's really, really useful. I don't know how I managed to survive without it before. I guess I always just took measurements of my body, and sometimes I didn't take measurements of my body. Early on, I tended to just follow what the pattern said, and then I did work out after that that wasn't a good idea, because vintage patterns, which I like, tend to be for shorter women than myself. So, but now I feel like I don't want any garments without this template. So if you haven't got anything like this, or if you've never seen one, go and create one. Let me know how things work out for you after you've knit using a template, or leave some comments about your thoughts from this process that I went through today. I'd love to hear them. I'm really looking forward to hearing those. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to, so that other people on YouTube can find the channel if they like vintage knitting too. And just trying to think of whether there's anything else that I need to say. I wanted to keep this one fairly short and sharp. Alrighty, well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. See you later. Bye.